So a number of episodes ago, I covered a platforming game based on the animated cat and mouse duo of Tom and Jerry. And back when I made that video, I was confused as to how a game released in 1993 came on a 5¼ inch disc. But it turns out it didn't. I don't actually have a viable means of getting data off of 5¼ inch discs right now, so I just made the assumption that because my disc for the game simply said Tom and Jerry on it, that it was referring to said platformer since it didn't have a subtitle. And thus, those were the archived files I pulled to be able to demonstrate the game. But it turns out the disc I have is actually for today's earlier ancient DOS game titled Tom and Jerry Yankee Doodle's CAT-astrophe. Naturally, since this is the game I actually have, it made sense to check it out appropriately. Now, from what I understand, this game is supposed to be based on one of the original Tom and Jerry shorts, specifically the 11th one ever made, titled The Yankee Doodle Mouse, which I have indeed watched, and it's basically typical Tom and Jerry slapstick comedy, but with a World War II theme, whereby the two are attacking each other with various household objects taking the place of real weaponry, like eggs for grenades, light bulbs for bombs, a cheese grater as a tank, and sticks of TNT for sticks of TNT. Yeah, that doesn't seem like a common household object, but whatever. The point is that this game actually follows the events of the 7.5-minute long short film surprisingly well, instead making it so that the player, as Jerry, is able to access these things in whichever order they want, and then attempt to score points by using them against Tom. That said, the game is very shallow. You'll have seen and done everything it has in store for you in under 10 minutes of play. So really, it just comes down to getting good at the game's mechanics and going for high scores. Which doesn't make it a bad game by any stretch, just not one that's going to hold your attention. Certainly not one which would have warranted paying full price. Though, looking up old catalogs online, it seems this game originally sold for just $12. So, yeah, that's reasonable for what you get here. Tom and Jerry Yankee Doodle's CAT-astrophe was developed and published by High-Tech Expressions in the latter half of 1990, and at its core is a one-player arcade-style action game. Now, despite things I've seen online which contradict this, as far as I can tell, the game only supports CGA 4-color and EGA 16-color graphics, both running at 320 by 200 resolution, and only supports PC speaker sound. The sources online suggest that there might be more graphics and audio support than this, but there certainly isn't in the copy I'm playing. Heck, the CGA mode is not even auto-detected. You have to manually enable it with a command line parameter. As for its current release date though, it was never made freeware, and is thus technically still commercial, but finding physical copies is pretty mundane. They're only slightly rare, usually with at least a few for sale at any point in time, they're not too hard to dig up, and they're moderately priced, typically going for around $15 to $20 for a loose disc, either 5¼ inch or 3½ inch, and fully boxed the prices are more like $35 to $50. Yeah, nothing too outrageous for the game stats this time around. Though I guess one last thing I can do is prove that there is indeed a CGA mode in this game, since, again, this does not automatically activate on CGA hardware. You have to explicitly add in the command line parameter /C, and it has to be a slash or it won't get read correctly. Plus, the executable only has the ability to read one command line argument, and, as far as I can tell, /C is the only command line argument the game detects. I mean, from what I understand, it's pretty trivial to detect the presence of EGA graphics support, so I'm kinda surprised this game from 1990 isn't capable of this. When starting up the game, you're presented with a menu asking you to first set your level of play as either 1 or 2, which simply adjusts how aggressive Tom is and how well he dodges you. Then you're asked if you want to play with the keyboard or joystick, if a joystick is detected, and then you're asked how long you want the game to last for, which you can set between 1 and 10 minutes, with 5 minutes being the default length. Now, one thing right off the bat I find kind of annoying is that none of these settings separate out into different high scores tables. There's just one high scores table for the entire program. Thus, playing on the lower level of play with a higher time limit will almost always result in better scores than playing on the higher skill setting with less time. When the game begins, Tom and Jerry first take a few paces away from each other, and then all heck breaks loose as it now becomes a free-for-all. You'll also notice that you start each new game with 100 points by default. This is because anytime Tom successfully hurts Jerry, you lose points instead of gaining points. For instance, under normal conditions, Tom will chase Jerry around and take lunges at Jerry with his teeth. Now, every time Tom makes a lunge for Jerry, you'll either get a point if Tom misses, or lose 2 points if Tom successfully gets Jerry. The idea is, in order to score big in this game, you have to succeed with hurting Tom without taking any harm yourself. Scattered around the main room are 2 things you can take advantage of: a box of TNT and a basket of sewing needles. When you grab a stick of TNT, you can drop it anywhere you want, or will automatically drop it if Tom catches you. The time it takes for the TNT to explode is kind of a hard thing to nail down, since it'll go longer as you continue to hold it, but once dropped, it'll either explode on its own after a certain period of time following, or if Tom or Jerry spends a particular amount of time within its blast radius. Keeping in mind that Jerry will take the damage instead of Tom if both of them are in range of the blast. Blasting Tom is worth 10 points, while blasting Jerry loses you 10 points. Sewing needles are actually the one thing in this game which doesn't come from the animated short, and results in playing a sort of fencing mini-game, where both Tom and Jerry are each able to strike low or high and block low or high. This, well, it kind of demands that we talk about the controls, because the controls in this game are in a weird in-between state, where you can hold keys down just fine, but only one key gets detected at a time. So something I should explain about how a PC keyboard actually works is that trying to monitor all 100 plus keys would require an insane number of data lines. So instead, keyboards only report a single byte value at any point in time, which is called the keyboard scan code. The scan code is 7 bits to indicate which physical key is being reported, followed by a single bit to indicate if the key was just pressed down or just released. This is all the keyboard does, thus it's up to the computer itself to decide what to do with that information. The default BIOS handler on all computers is optimized for typing, thus is only able to report a single key at a time while buffering multiple keystrokes and also tracking key repeat if the key is held down for more than a split second. The way you make a multi-key press keyboard handler in DOS is to effectively add your own interrupt routine to run in place on IRQ1, which is practically always the IRQ used for the keyboard, and write your own code to detect the key presses and key releases and track them individually for all 128 possible scan codes. However, some developers didn't actually know how to write interrupt routines, and you can't do proper multi-key press tracking otherwise. So the next best thing you can do without an interrupt routine is to just monitor the keyboard port and only respond to scan codes indicating a key has been pressed down. In this manner, you can create a keyboard routine which allows you to hold down keys without issue, but you're limited to holding only one key at a time. And that's the kind of keyboard handling present here in this game. Also, because it's not using an interrupt routine, it can and sometimes does miss very quick inputs, which happen too fast for the normal game loop to detect. So knowing this, and understanding that the controls are all based on a numeric keypad, with insert as the main fire button and enter as the secondary button, normally used for jumping, the way you control the fencing minigame is that if you want to block, you simply press up or down to block high or low. But if you want to attack, you first press insert to indicate you're going to attack, release the insert key, then immediately press up or down to indicate a high or low attack. If you press up or down first, you get a block instead of an attack, and if you hold the attack button down while trying to press up or down, because the game is still detecting the insert key as being held down, the up and down directions get ignored. The lack of being able to hold multiple keys down makes the controls in some of these segments far more finicky than they really should be. Now, if you have Jerry go into the mouse hole or to the left, you get some more things you can do. A mousetrap with a tomato is primed and ready to launch at Tom, and it's worth a solid 100 points if you can get it to land. But this tomato is often way more trouble than it's worth, since you really can't aim it properly ahead of time, you only get one shot to make it work, it takes a while for Tom to be lined up just right, and if you spend too much time in the wall, Tom will throw a stick of TNT in, which will cause you to lose 25 points, even if you land the tomato hit. You can also climb up to the hole above and start throwing eggs at each other. Now, this minigame is all about timing, since you can't duck or jump out of the way of an egg if your own egg is flying through the air. Thus, you have to make smart decisions about when to throw an egg, or when to wait so you can dodge an incoming egg before throwing your own. It's 10 points per hit, and 10 points lost per hit that you take, but because Tom can dodge the attacks, I find this one's also not really worth the effort in terms of how many points you can score for the amount of time it takes to play this. The two activities which are going to score you a lot of points, though, are the cheese grater tank and the shoebox bomber. The shoebox bomber is much harder to fly, as instead of controlling an absolute direction, you turn it clockwise and counterclockwise, while also affecting its altitude. And if you smash into anything, you crash and lose 5 points. Plus, getting the altitude just right so you can fly over top of Tom while not hitting the ceiling is tricky. Not to mention, aiming is difficult due to the lack of a shadow to show your vertical position relative to the floor. In any event, each light bulb you successfully bomb Tom with is worth 25 points, so if you can pull it off, you can score a lot of points from this one. But it's definitely very hard to control and aim. Also, keep in mind that the box of TNT in the bottom right corner of the room has infinite height, so you are almost certainly going to smash into that thing many times while wondering what the heck you crashed into. The other contraption you can drive is the cheese grater tank. Well, this automatically moves on its own, but you can change direction simply by pressing which direction you want to move in, and keeping in mind you cannot turn around 180 degrees in a single key press. You have to make 2 separate turns to go back the way you came. Basically, every time you run into Tom with this thing, it's worth 10 points, and if you can get a particular rhythm going, those points can add up really fast. And none of the activities go on forever, mind you. Oftentimes, Tom will fire a plunger gun at you to stop you, or he'll use fireworks to shoot you out of the sky, or will smash you with a hammer. Well, actually, the hammer can end up coming out seemingly at random if you end up doing a lot of harm to Tom without playing any of the activities, though going into one of the activities will remove the hammer from play. Though I have seen the hammer sprite itself get stuck in the world sometimes between games. And one other thing I want to point out, there's somehow a means to score multiple 50-point rewards back to back, and I was never able to figure out what causes this. It's not listed on the instructions card, and the only 2 occasions I got this effect to trigger was immediately after crashing the cheese grater tank into something before Tom got out the hammer to try and put an end to the fun. And I played at least a couple dozen rounds of this game to make sure I figured out as much as I could. Whatever this bonus is related to has nothing to do with how accurate you are, or how many points you score in each activity. It might be related to playing the activities at all, but even that seems like a stretch. If anyone figures it out, please let me know so I can add those details into the video description. Overall, Tom and Jerry Yankee Doodle's CAT-astrophe is an okay game. It's very short, very simple, a little clunky to control, but has decent visuals. And this almost feels like it would be more appropriate as a game on an actual arcade machine, with even more souped up graphics and audio and such. But alas, the reality is that this is a budget title. Actually, I think the bigger missed opportunity here is that there's only 1-player support. Much of what's here feels like it would work as a 2-player versus game, with one player playing as Jerry and the other as Tom. And maybe if there was more of a budget behind this product, we would have gotten that. Ultimately, it's worth trying out if you get a chance, but given how short it is, you're not missing much if you don't. The game runs fine with the auto cycle setting in DOSBox, but if you intend to use a joystick or gamepad, you do need to turn off timed intervals to get it to work right. However, the joystick controls suffer from the same issues as the keyboard controls, and that only one control input can be detected at a time. Thus, it's actually easier to play this game with the keyboard, so that's what I recommend you do. Anywho, that'll be all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. The last ADG episode for the year, episode 336, will be 2 weeks from now on Saturday, December 7th, and we'll be taking a look at a sequel which received a serious visual upgrade over its predecessor, despite retaining very similar gameplay. So make sure to stay tuned and see which game got such an overhaul. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to all the folks shown here supporting me on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show directly and see your name here as well, head on over to patreon.com/KASICK.